The Skinnerian legacy is present every time we talk about alignment to someone else's curriculum, which is broken down into little bitty pieces with lots of rating and ranking and positive reinforcement, giving kids the equivalent of a doggy biscuit for pressing the bar or finding their way through the maze. It's a different view of human nature, of children, and of learning than the best research and practice and theory has allowed us. But we break stuff down into pieces. We take the idea of learning in its real organic sense, and we artificially say, the bell has rung, you have to put down the binomial equations and go read Faulkner down the hall. Or even in elementary school, put away your social studies books, boys and girls, and take out your reading books. Or more absurdly, put away your reading and take out your spelling workbooks. Making sure to teach spelling as its own little bitty fiefdom that isn't connected to literacy more generally. None of this is a fact of nature, the idea of separating natural science from social science, or mathematics from literacy for that matter. There are problems out there to be solved that require us to draw from a wealth of different skills and knowledge bases. But we divide it into pieces. We divide the facts and the skills within each discipline into a bunch of individual components and teach them separately. Linda Darling Hammond at Stanford once remarked that, quote, if we taught babies to talk, as most skills are taught in school, they would memorize lists of sounds in a predetermined order and practice them alone in a closet. We divide learning about stuff from doing the stuff, if the kids are lucky enough to get to do at all. We divide kid from kid, beginning in elementary school, teaching, as one researcher put it many years ago, the central lesson of the American elementary school, which is how to be alone in a crowd. I want to see what you can do, not what your neighbor can do, as my elementary school teachers used to say to me. What they really meant was, I want to see what you can do artificially deprived of the skills and help of the people around you, rather than seeing how much more you can accomplish in a well-functioning team that's more authentic and like real life. I don't think they put it that way. It's all about dividing up, and then in high school, dividing up clumps of kids based on what we think or predict or cause their trajectory to be after they graduate, with certain kids getting the more advanced courses, not necessarily better courses, but certainly harder courses, while others get remedial this and basic that, enough to turn anyone off to learning. Divide. It's all about fragmentation. If we ever talk about whole children, about the idea of there being more than academics, we talk about their social needs, their physical development, artistic, and so on. We even divide those up with specific programs to address their social needs, to address their artistic development, emotional intelligence, and so on, one after another. That's not the whole child. The whole child is an integrated whole, which means that every aspect of education has to address different features of the person. But the fragmentation temptation makes its presence felt even for those enlightened folks who talk about the whole child. It's all about fragmentation. Step one toward remedying this ugly residue of traditionalism is, if we're going to have a pretty traditional school divided into traditional subjects, at least kids are studying those topics in a context and for a purpose. And no, it will not do as a purpose to say that they're going to expect you to know this next year, or you've got to learn trigonometry because you need it to get into college, or you need to have this group of facts digested temporarily till you spit it out again in 3rd grade because the 4th grade teachers expect it of you. We do stuff, especially to younger kids, that is totally without intrinsic merit, without intellectual justification. And we do it purely because of a phenomenon I've come to call bigudi, which stands for better get used to it. This stuff makes no sense, but people are going to do it to you later, so we have to prepare you for that by subjecting you to pointless experiences now while you're young. This is actually the driving justification for the use of standardized tests, competition, homework, grades, and other things for which there is probably not a good justification at any age, but certainly not for younger children. It reminds me of the Monty Python sketch, Getting Hit on the Head Lessons, where a guy walks into a room, whack, ow, no, not ow, turn your head like this and say, wah, try it again, wah, better. Why are you hitting me? This is getting hit on the head lessons. Standardized testing, competition, homework, grades, and the like are excellent preparation for getting hit on the head again later. And there are actually people who, without any trace of irony, justify doing things to younger students purely because they're going to be done to them later. How many people in their jobs or in their lives will ever need anything beyond what they would learn in the first month of Algebra 1? Well, we have some, I don't know about their lives, but we have some research about their jobs, and it turns out that a tiny fraction, far fewer than 1 out of 5, will ever in their jobs require anything, I think, beyond anything in Algebra 1 or even including that. And yet the research shows that you need advanced math because it's excellent preparation for more advanced math that you might get in college. We have terrific middle school teachers who understand the developmental needs of their young and pre-adolescents and are being compelled to teach badly, which is to say, like traditional high school teachers, purely because the high schools expect the kids to come into high school with this bunch of facts crammed into short-term memory. We have kindergartens that have been turned into bad first grades, all because of this notion not merely of fragmentation, but of preparation. If we teach them in a context and for a purpose, we then have literacy being learned because, not because vocabulary or grammar or spelling are ends in themselves, but purely as means to an end of being able to communicate stuff that matters and to do it effectively, to read with understanding. I have a friend who likes to say, I don't care whether kids can spell well. Some of the brightest people I know are lousy spellers. I care whether they know how to edit the stuff they're writing so the final draft doesn't make them look like an idiot. And they would draw from the repository of information about correct spelling they have in their head, but they would also draw from spell check, a dictionary, and the person sitting next to them like real people do. Whether they're good spellers, we get all this. The research about grammar has shown for years, decades even, that there is no value whatsoever to the explicit instruction about grammar. That even if you use grammar outcome variables, people do better if you spent that time doing real reading and writing. You may not know how to diagram a sentence. When was the last time you were asked outside of a classroom to do that? And the same is true for mathematics, where the best math classrooms are not merely taking a predetermined list of, now they have to check off the knows how to use a Venn diagram standard and teach this garbage to kids, or the definition of an irrational number, which you can always look up. Real mathematics is done in order to figure out what the hell your odds are playing that slot machine. Or whether it is ever possible, no matter how many recounts you do in a very close election, to arrive at the truth, or whatever. In a context and for a purpose, for literacy and for mathematics. two educators in New York who are married, Jackie and Marty Brooks, had a great line in a book about constructivist teaching. They said, I'm paraphrasing here, not because I think I can say it better, but because I don't remember, but they said something like, so often we get frustrated as teachers because kids don't remember what they learned. But that's not true. Probably they never learned it. They were just taught it. They may have remembered the facts temporarily, but in terms of meaningful learning, it never happened unless it was taught in a context and for a purpose. Now, I have a lot more to say, and maybe you do too, about what that means in the context of a traditionally fragmented and preparation-oriented classroom. But I'm interested in step 2, and I think that's why you're here as well. Step 2 is to question the classroom, to question the division between disciplines, to question the organization of the curriculum. The best schools are not organized around lists of facts and skills and separate disciplines. They're organized around problems and projects and questions. Notice, not just projects added on to the traditional curriculum, but these projects as the organizing principle of the entire curriculum. That's radical. And that's exciting. But it's not new, which is why I have little patience for 21st century this and that. It means very little. I wrote a satirical piece about this. Oh, that's not enough. We need 22nd century skills, and we need them now, you know, just... Anybody who uses this sort of, whatever the phrase, the marketing campaign of the moment is, deserves that kind of skepticism. Pick the thing that you think is most important in terms of the way kids should be learning, and ask whether it wasn't also appropriate in the 20th century. We just weren't doing it. Or won't probably be appropriate in the next century. In 1918, John Dewey's associate, William Kilpatrick, was talking about project-based learning, talking about the need for, quote, wholehearted, purposeful activity proceeding in a social environment. He added, the essential factor is the presence of a dominating purpose. That's what defines project-based learning. Real purpose. The fact that they're going to want you to know this in the next stage, that's what Lillian Katz calls vertical relevance. You need to get this now because when you move up in the ladder, you're going to need it. But horizontal relevance means what you're doing in school now might be connected to a question you have this very afternoon about something maybe even that takes place outside of school. It implies authenticity, real life problems. Not cute projects that you think up for the kids because they'll find it amusing or entertaining or even useful at accumulating skills with sugar to help the medicine go down, but problems and projects that they care about. Organizing it that way. Do you see the problem here? I'm just going to hint at this, something I'll say more about later, and I hope you all have been chewing on already. You see the problem with trying to benchmark the effectiveness of what you're doing in your schools by how closely you meet district and state standards? District and state standards are not using these meaningful criteria for learning. They're still talking about how many lists of facts, skills, and sub-skills on the behaviorist model the kids have had forced down their throats. If you measure New Tech Network success on the basis of meeting state standards, you will undermine the quality of New Tech Network because those standards aren't good enough for you. And not only do they not rise to the level of true project-based learning, if you take them too seriously, those district and state standards, or worse, that multiple choice tests, one size fits all, that are linked to the standards, you will begin to reduce the quality of the teaching in order to meet bad criteria and to have kids do well at tests that measure what matters least. I know there's a gun to your head. during these dark, dark reactionary days, as future educational historians will view this time in history, when we lost our collective minds, or at least lost our children's minds, with this talk about top-down, heavy-handed, test-driven, corporate-style, data-oriented approach. If you don't get nervous about lots of talk about data in the context of children, you need to recharge your crap detector. That's not an argument against assessment. It's an argument against bad assessment, and it's an argument against billionaires and politicians who know less about learning than you do, getting to dictate to you not only what you're teaching and how, but what the basis will be for evaluating your success. Believe me, the best teachers in this room spend most of their professional lives actively ignoring or subverting the state standards. The question is, will we organize to have a voice, to educate the adults, the politicians working for us, the journalists reporting on education, who report in monosyllables, test scores go up, that good, so that they can come to understand that real project-based learning organized around problems and projects is far superior to the traditional model, the very model that is underscored and driven by the use of hundreds of standards. Every fourth grader will be able to ... will remember this fact, will know that, will be able to do this. That's the fragmentation we're trying to transcend. Don't confuse what I'm talking about here and what I hope you're doing with projects that are separate from the teaching of facts and skills, where we do the real instruction and then you get to do a project to test it out. Let me say it again. Projects, problems, questions as the organizing principle of everything that kids are doing in your school. And part of that implies overcoming the divisions between disciplines. True interdisciplinary instruction means you should be spending most of your time in teams, thinking mostly as a generalist, as an educator of kids, not an educator of mathematics or science or Spanish or chemistry. High school teachers in particular, and I used to be one, have this tendency more than elementary school teachers to pride themselves on the complexity of what they teach compared to elementary school teachers, as if because what I'm teaching is harder to master, that means that I know more about education, which isn't necessarily true. And thinking primarily that I have this repository of information to transmit to the students sitting, God help us, in rows. But in the great high schools, you manage to transcend your expertise in physics or romantic literature or calculus to work with your colleagues to create a school-wide network of project and problem-based learning. You're not just doing projects in your discipline because real life and thinking do not align themselves neatly in these specific disciplines that we take for granted now, but which basically had to be invented at some point. This project-based approach has been developed and tested all the way from preschool to graduate school with remarkable success. I don't know if you know this. If you teach high school, I'm not sure if you're aware of the larger pedigree, let's call it, of this approach. I mentioned a moment ago Lillian Katz, one of my mentors in the field of early childhood education. She and her colleague from Canada, Sylvia Chard, wrote a book years ago called Engaging Children's Minds, the Project Approach. in which they rejected both of the dominant models for teaching little kids. The dominant models are either you get them ready for a bad kindergarten by making sure they know their numbers and their letters and their colors, academics before kids can pronounce the word academics. Or you say, yuck, just let them play, and they do macaroni collages all day. And the alternative is, as Katz puts it, a curriculum for preschoolers that is not academic, but it is intellectual. I thought that distinction was telling for people of all ages. A lot of stuff done that's academic, I don't want to have much to do with. It may be rigorous, but it's not particularly worthwhile or engaging. By the way, this is my favorite story about that word. Principal, who I know, whoops, okay, thanks. No, entirely my fault for turning this into a track and field event. Thank God I found the clothes in the gift shop before that happened. That's all I can say. Too much information. Principal I know was asked by a parent early in the year, one morning, as kids were being dropped off, are you going to give my child a rigorous education this year? And my friend, the principal, said, you know, I'm not sure. Let me look up the word tonight, and I'll get back to you with an answer tomorrow, which I found a very promising first response, frankly. And the next day, he found the parent and said, the answer to your question is, good heavens, no. Now, I used to say to people at this point in telling the story, tonight, go find a good unabridged dictionary and look up the word. But of course, you could do that instantly right here, couldn't you, if you wanted to? And if you have, to keep me honest, you will probably find in any good dictionary, online or otherwise, that rigorous has, usually in the dictionary, it says see synonyms at harsh or rigid or something like that. But I defy you to find any definition of the word rigorous that could conceivably be associated with richer, more engaged, and excited learning that matters. I don't want my kids getting a rigorous education because that's based on the fundamental confusion driving school reform, which is that if it's harder, it must be better. AP courses are among the hardest in almost any high school. Does that mean they're good? At least ask the question. In fact, AP courses typically are lecture-driven, textbook-based in most schools, and in any case, exist for the purpose of getting kids a particular score, a 3, 4, or 5 on an exam. So that if you taught an AP course in American history and you happened to find that the kids were really curious about the Civil War and whether it was mostly about slavery, as we were told, and why we didn't just let the South secede, and they wanted to read primary source documents instead of just a textbook, and they wanted to spend a month and a half using the Civil War as a case study for understanding what it means to think like an historian, which is what the best history courses are like. The AP teacher has to say, I'm sorry, we have to be at the Korean War by March. And the National Science Foundation has excoriated AP science courses as a great way to make sure nobody grows up to want to be a scientist. I'm not saying AP teachers aren't skilled. I'm saying that AP courses don't do justice to their teaching skills. And more generally, I'm saying just don't assume that if it's rigorous, that means it's of higher quality. And this is a problem you can make in an error you could make in a project-based environment as well. But when you're thinking about meaningful stuff, intellectually valuable stuff in preschool, for example, you're not talking about their academic skills. You're having the kids think in a systematic way about the stuff they're already wondering about, like a month-long project on the weather, or trucks and transportation, or something like that. In order to quote, I'm quoting Katz and Chard here, make fuller, deeper, more accurate sense of their experiences. That book, by the way, is very useful if you can do some substitution and extrapolation in your mind for teaching older kids. But now let's look at the other end of the continuum. The idea of problem-based education was developed in the late 60s at McMaster University for teaching doctors, future doctors, to revolutionize a medical school curriculum. They don't take separate courses in cardiology and histology and nephrology and so on, and then when you graduate, you go into pick a residency and good luck using that stuff or putting it all together. It's all fragmented. The problem-based approach starts from the beginning of medical school with real patients who have real illnesses in which the medical students have to learn how to acquire and integrate what we know from a great many different sub-disciplines into solving real problems. It makes sense all along the way. And so project-based education is more than just projects on top of a curriculum. That's what the curriculum is about, and it involves everyone teaching in the school together to do lengthy, multidisciplinary. The problem with the word interdisciplinary is some people assume it means that the disciplines naturally are the pillars, the cornerstones, but we just connect them somehow. In the worst case, it's totally perfunctory. Like you do a math problem, but because you're studying something about China in social studies or history class, you have word problems that involve 4 Chinese students who are trying to figure out how to blah, 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 you know. But what if instead you were trying to figure out how would you design a car for contemporary Chinese people, given the constraints on the effect on the environment, given the current and expected earning potentials, given the traffic patterns in Shanghai and Beijing? What would that look like? If everybody came together and you had to design a car, kids would have to, and then explain it, they would have to be drawing from and becoming more adept at language facilities, maybe even some translation here, learning some Mandarin, but certainly mathematics, science, social studies, history, all of this coming together in the service of a real problem that really matters. If you don't want to design a car for China, have them design a new playground for the local elementary school. What would you do, given the constraints and resources, to make school lunches better? These are projects that matter. They are necessarily interdisciplinary, and if you have the guts, they can be the driving force of the curriculum. But what is most exciting for kids, what is most productive about this approach, is precisely what is most unsettling for all of us. Because when you think about it, what I have just described directly or indirectly challenges very basic assumptions built into American ideology. It is not a coincidence that what I've been describing has existed only at the margins of our schools and only in a few schools. Because when you do this seriously, you don't just run up against the fact that some idiot in your state house is telling you that we're going to let your school continue to live only if your students have an improved score on a lousy test devised by people far away for the purpose of spreading out the scores so you can rank. The problem is that when you do this stuff, you challenge assumptions made about learning. For example, the notion that if it's rigorous, it must be better, and that we need to raise the bar in American education. Have you heard this expression? Never mind that this expression, as far as I can tell, originated in the world of show horses, which tells you pretty much everything you need to know about the attitude of children on the part of people who talk like this. More importantly, it's saying we're not going to question the basic assumptions and practices of education. We're going to do the same damn thing, but now we're going to do it harder, tougher, faster, louder, meaner. That will cause us to have more rigorous education so that we can. What's the goal? What is the goal beyond the testing? What's the goal beyond